September 1942, the heart of the Australian Outback. The heat shimmered across the horizon like a mirage, a red sea of dust and silence broken only by the hum of distant engines. To most, this land was nothing more than wilderness, endless desert, dry riverbeds, and lonely cattle stations scattered hundreds of miles apart. But hidden beyond the horizon, carved out of stone and sand, was something no one outside a small circle of Allied officers was supposed to know existed. A runway so vast and precise it seemed impossible it could have been built here. Concrete poured over cracked desert clay, hangars disguised beneath netting that mimicked the color of the red earth. It was the largest and most secret airfield ever constructed in the southern hemisphere, a miracle of engineering and logistics that had taken root in the most unforgiving landscape on Earth. Its existence was a closely guarded secret, known only to a handful of men in London, Washington, and Canberra. But secrets like this never stay buried for long. Somewhere in the Indian Ocean, on a rust-streaked cargo ship flying a neutral flag, a madman, Kurt Weissman, adjusted his binoculars and peered through the salt-filled wind. Officially, he was a Swiss climatologist charting air currents across the southern seas. In truth, he was a German intelligence officer of the Abwehr, sent under deep cover to uncover rumors that had reached Berlin, whispers of an Allied airbase so far inland and so large that it defied every law of reason, a base from which bombers could leap half the planet in a single bound, linking Australia to the war in Africa, the Middle East, even Europe itself. For months, German analysts had dismissed it as propaganda. Australia was a backwater, they said, a colonial outpost, too far to matter. But the Japanese had reported something strange. Allied bombers appearing over Burma and Sumatra, carrying markings that didn't match any known Pacific squadron. Engines modified for long-range flight, fuel systems designed for desert conditions. The implication was unthinkable that the Allies were launching aircraft from the very heart of the Australian continent. Weissman landed quietly in Darwin under a false identity, posing as a technician for a neutral shipping company. He moved south by rail and by truck, through land scarred by the Japanese air raids that had nearly crippled the port months earlier. The farther inland he went, the quieter the world became. Roads vanished into dirt tracks, towns thinned out into ghostly clusters of corrugated iron sheds. And then, one afternoon, as the sun melted into the horizon and the sky turned the color of blood, he saw them. Dozens of silver bombers lined up in perfect symmetry across the red plain. Their propellers glinted in the dying light, their crews moving like ants beneath the massive wings. He counted not 2 or 3, but scores of aircraft, Liberators, Hudsons, and Mitchells, each fully fueled and armed. They were launching one after another into the golden sky, heading west, vanishing over the desert's edge. He felt a chill in the Australian heat. No port could have built this. No civilian company could have hidden it. He had just witnessed the impossible. The base had begun as a desperate experiment after the fall of Singapore. When the Japanese advance had sliced through Asia, Australia had found itself dangerously isolated. The Royal Australian Air Force needed a way to connect with the Allied front lines in India and the Middle East without depending on sea convoys, which were now easy prey for submarines and surface raiders. What they built was an airfield that shouldn't have been possible. Thousands of men and women, engineers, laborers, pilots, meteorologists carved a city of aviation out of nothing but dust. They drilled wells deep into the desert, ran fuel lines from depots hidden in mountain passes, and poured runways longer than any in Europe. At night, under blackout conditions, the workers could see the glow of furnaces miles away where steel and concrete were being produced on site. By the time the first aircraft landed, the world had no idea a new front of logistics had opened beneath their feet. Every few hours, bombers lifted off from the desert floor, bound for Ceylon, Karachi, and Cairo. They carried spare parts, mail, medical supplies, and sometimes intelligence couriers, whose only route across the oceans was through the sky. The journey was perilous, 1,000 miles of open ocean, storms and uncertainty. But it worked. For the first time, aircraft were connecting continents without ships or ports. The Germans had built their strategy on the assumption that the seas could be controlled. The Allies had simply chosen to fly over them. Far away in Berlin, in the gray offices of the Abwehr, reports began to arrive. Intercepted radio signals mentioning Southern Cross Station, shipping, manifests that didn't match any known cargo route, weather broadcasts from the Indian Ocean that referenced flights no one could trace. And then came Weissman's message, coded, concise, and unbelievable. Airfield of industrial scale exists in Central Australia. Continuous departures of heavy bombers, range sufficient for direct operations to the Middle East. At first the analysts laughed. An airfield in the desert the size of a city? Fuel depots in the middle of nowhere? Madness. But cross-references from Japanese observers soon arrived. Bombers sighted west of Java, altitude 5,000 meters, origin unknown. German scientists examined the wind charts and realized it could only be possible if the aircraft had come from deep within Australia. The laughter stopped. Colonel Heinrich Mahler, one of Abwehr's senior analysts, pinned a map of the southern hemisphere to his wall. He traced the routes of the U-boats prowling the Indian Ocean, the convoys running between Africa and Asia, and the new arc of flight stretching from the Outback across the Indian Ocean to Cairo. If the data was true, the implications were catastrophic. The entire foundation of Germany's naval strategy, the strangulation of Allied supply, had just been rendered obsolete. "They have built a bridge of air," he told his staff. "A bridge we cannot sink." By the end of 1942, intelligence confirmed that the base was real. Aerial photographs captured from Japanese reconnaissance planes showed faint geometric scars in the desert, massive runways, hangars, and fuel farms. The Germans began referring to it by a grim nickname, Das Unglückliche Feld, the impossible field. And in every sense it was. The Allies called it simply Project Southern Cross. Its purpose was not glory or fame. It was survival. The base allowed the rapid delivery of new bombers from American factories to the European and Pacific fronts. Pilots flew the machines straight from assembly lines in California to Brisbane, across the continent to the desert airfield, and then onward across the Indian Ocean. What once took months by ship now took days by air. The logistical equation of war had been rewritten, and it was here, halfway through this transformation, that history pivoted. If you've been following these stories of hidden war and impossible innovation, make sure to subscribe right now. The effort that goes into uncovering and telling these forgotten operations, from Australia's deserts to Europe's frozen skies, deserves a place in history, and your support helps keep these stories alive. So hit that subscribe button and join us as we bring the unseen moments of World War II back into focus. Back in the desert, the base roared with life. Pilots from across the Commonwealth shared the same red dust airfields. Canadians, New Zealanders, Britons, and Australians all flying side by side. Mechanics worked around the clock under floodlights, masked from above by camouflage. Meteorologists tracked the violent crosswinds that could shred an aircraft within minutes. And in the control tower, officers plotted the flight paths that stitched together the global war. Flight Officer Margaret Hayes, one of the first female navigators in the RAAF, recalled the intensity. "You didn't have time to think about where you were," she wrote years later. "You only thought about the sky, about the next departure, the next weather front, the next 1,000 miles. Each takeoff was a gamble against the desert, the ocean, and the enemy's reach. Yet every day the bombers lifted off, and every night more arrived. The air never stopped vibrating with engines." Weissman, meanwhile, watched from the shadows. He sent sketches of the runways and coded messages describing the tempo of operations. But Australian counterintelligence had begun to close in. The Abwehr agent who had moved invisibly for months suddenly found himself hunted. Patrols tightened around the rail lines. Aboriginal trackers followed boot prints no local would make. And one night, as a storm tore across the desert, Weissman made his final transmission. "The machines rise endlessly," he wrote. "The desert itself has become an aircraft carrier." The next morning, he was gone, captured, or perhaps lost to the sand, his fate never officially recorded. When his final report reached Berlin, it caused a quiet panic. Mallow presented the findings to the General Staff in a windowless conference room. On the table lay charts showing U-boat successes in the Atlantic, merchant ships sunk, convoys scattered. Beside them, a single sheet showing aircraft deliveries across the Indian Ocean. The contrast was staggering. "Every bomber that crosses from Australia replaces a ship we might have sunk," he said flatly. "Every flight from that airfield is a defeat we cannot prevent." Some officers dismissed him. The Luftwaffe still ruled the skies over Europe, they said. But Mallow was relentless. "Gentlemen," he told them, "you are thinking in miles. They are thinking about continents." As 1943 dawned, the scale of the operation became undeniable. Intelligence intercepts revealed that thousands of aircraft had already transited the route. The Americans had joined in full force, using Australia as the midpoint in an unbroken air bridge stretching from San Francisco to Cairo. Allied bombers were now arriving at the front, faster than the Germans could shoot them down. It was no longer a trickle. It was a flood. In the red center of Australia, the airfield expanded again. New runways extended over the horizon. Hangars rose like mountains of steel. Fuel depots glowed faintly at night under blackout tarps. The base had grown into a self-contained city with mess halls, barracks, weather stations, and hospitals. The locals called it the crossroads of the world. To the German analysts, it was a nightmare, a symbol of Allied industrial power fused with geographical genius. Colonel Mallows' last memo before his reassignment was stark. If the Reich cannot reach the enemy's factories, then the war is mathematically lost. They have built a machine that moves faster than our destruction can keep pace. By 1943, the truth was visible even to those who refused to see it. Allied bombers now rained fire on Europe, supplied and maintained through a chain of airfields that began in Australia's desert heart. The sea war was collapsing. Submarines could no longer choke the arteries of supply because the Allies had simply created new ones in the sky. Every ton of steel, every gallon of fuel, every rivet and bullet was now crossing oceans not in the hulls of ships, but in the bellies of aircraft. In the Outback, pilots prepared for another long night of departures. The desert wind howled through the hangars as mechanics checked engines by torchlight. From above, the base looked like a constellation, rows of runway lights stretching into the black. Flight Officer Hayes climbed into her Liberator, the cockpit hot even at midnight. Ahead, the engines thundered, and she could see the dust swirling under the landing lights like smoke from some unseen forge. She thought of home, of the coastline she would not see for another 2 days, and of the strange irony that victory for the Allies was being forged in the most desolate place on Earth. When the bomber lifted off, its shadow skimmed across the desert, past the sleeping camps and fuel tanks, and into the infinite sky. It joined a formation of others, each a spark in the darkness, each carrying the promise that the tide of war had turned. Half a world away in Berlin, Colonel Maller stood by his office window as sirens wailed in the distance. Another night raid? Another wave of bombers crossing from Britain, machines built in America, tested in Australia, maintained in Egypt, and delivered by the very network he had once warned about. The same chain that Weissman had glimpsed from the edge of the desert now stretched across the globe. He closed his eyes and muttered the words he had written months earlier. The enemy has built an empire of air. He knew then that it was over, not because of any single battle, but because the enemy had outthought them, outbuilt them, and outflown them. The war had been doomed the moment those engines first roared to life above the Australian sands. As the years rolled on, the secret base was absorbed into history, renamed and rebuilt until only the runways remained. But for those who had seen it, who had walked its red soil and felt its heat, it would forever be the place where the impossible became real, where a handful of engineers and dreamers proved that distance was just another weapon to be conquered. And for the German spies who once doubted it, the message was clear. The war was lost, not in the fields of Europe, but in the heart of a continent they had never understood. Australia, the forgotten frontier that built an airfield so vast, so improbable, that it changed the fate of the world. The engines faded into the horizon. The red desert swallowed the sound, and history turned a silent page